Hello everybody and welcome to Red Tool House. What we want to talk about this week is we want to go over the entire process of raising our meat birds, our Cornish Cross and the Red Rangers that we raised for meat processing. So we want to go into that, and I want to give a full overview of from start to finish so we can look at the numbers. Want to look at the profitability potential of these birds. Now again, we did a small scale initially to see how that would work out, and then of course identify if it's scalable or not. So we'll just dive right into that and get into the numbers here. Okay, so what are we talking about? What's our time frame? Well, our time frame was 10 weeks. So 10 weeks from when we got them to when we processed. So here's what we did. So 10 weeks ago, we ordered 15 Cornish Cross and 15 Red Rangers. And we got those from a hatchery, had those shipped in, and we put those in a brooder, of course. And so we received them from the post office. When we got them from the post office, got them home, opened up, we had one loss. So we were down one Cornish Cross already. And so as we got them in the brooder and started getting them going, they were doing well throughout the several weeks. And we actually had a little bit more loss. We had one of the Red Rangers die on us. And then at one point we had one Cornish Cross, I think it was about the second week, we had one Cornish Cross develop a neck issue. In fact, it was almost like he was trying to look under something. He'd walk around with that neck issue. So we called him because he wasn't going to recover from that. So that had us down from 15 Cornish Cross and 15 Freedom Rangers down to 13 Cornish Cross and 14 Freedom Rangers. So as we come out to the tractor, we have an issue where we had two more elements of loss. What we had are the Cornish Cross. They just out of the blue, two different ones at two different times in this life cycle just developed really bad leg issues. Couldn't walk. And so it was one of those things where, okay, that chicken can't walk, so it's not even going to be able to get to the feed. They're knocking it around. Their brothers and sisters are stepping on it. So there's obviously no compassion among chickens. So we realized, okay, we got to call this one and that one. So that took us down to 11. So again, the score at that time, as we're wrapping up in the tractor, is 11 to 14. So we spent 4 weeks in the brooder. And actually where I'm sitting is kind of the loop, and I'll show that in a separate clip, but it's kind of interesting to see the area where I'm sitting now is what I would call my front pasture. Now it's not big by any means. It's not even 100 yards, but it's the largest clearing I have on property right now, and it's had grass. We've cut grass on it for about 17 years now, so it's just been one of those things. You cut it just because it gets tall. At one point I did cut a little bit of hay off of it, but I've never done anything to try to improve it, never reseeded, never done anything like that. Just let whatever grow up and mow down. So you can see there's a lot of orchard grass, there's some timothy, there's definitely some clover in it. So it's decent stuff, but we've never really done anything to amend it. So we started right here. Actually where I'm sitting was the starting point. And I just simply went down and made a loop. And like I said, I'll show that footage. But you'll notice in that clip that you can see the stripe of green, where the grass is a much darker green in the horseshoe shape that I made with the chicken tractor throughout the remaining 6 weeks. So it's interesting to look at that and see, wow, okay, there's some truth to that. There's definitely some fertilization happening there, that there's some nutrient that the ground's getting that it wasn't getting before. And you look at the grass beside it that wasn't in the path, and the grass almost seems to have a yellow tint to it. But the grass that the chickens were on is just this much deeper emerald green. And I need to mow this. Everything I've read is that chicken tractors do better. Chickens do better when you have mowed grass, of course, and it isn't so tall that they're just matting it down, that they can actually get more out of it. But I've noticed first thing they do is they go for the clover. So the clover's all mowed down, and then they work on other stuff, some of the broadleaf stuff they like. But it's really been interesting to see that, and it's definitely proof that the chicken manure definitely supercharges stuff there. All right, well, let's get down to numbers. And we'll stay on the processing side first, and then we'll come back and look at feed conversion. So when it came time to processing, what we were going to do is process all of the Cornish cross and process one Red Ranger. I was going to pick the big boy out of the crowd. So the one that looked the biggest to me, I was going to pick him, and he was going to be my kind of my focus group there for the Red Rangers. Because I knew the Red Rangers just weren't up to weight. I've got one that is extremely small, almost dwarf-like, and it's one of those things I don't know that chicken will ever grow up to be a decent weight. So it'd be one of those deals where probably just have to call him at some point. These were all roosters. I did order roosters. I didn't order straight runs, which again added to my expense there. So let's break down what we had, and I've got my notes here, so bear with me. So what did we process? Well, we processed 12 chickens. We processed 11 Cornish Cross and 1 Freedom Ranger. Out of those 11 Cornish Cross, we did have one, just the week prior to processing, we had one that was started to develop leg issues. He couldn't stand still. He couldn't stand up still. He could only, when he stood up, he'd have to walk backwards. So he would actually walk backwards around in the tractor and try to stand him up, all those type of things. It wasn't neurological. It was definitely a joint issue. His knee joints, if you will, were acting up, and he just couldn't move himself forward enough to get his weight balance. He was always in that falling back mode, and so that was unfortunate. So that really, if it wasn't so close to processing, then that would have been another call. So that had taken us down to 10 Cornish Cross. But he was so close to processing, I told Kelly, I said, well, we'll just let him kind of back around the tractor for the next week. He would back himself into the trough and be able to get down and get feed on the ground. So I started calling him Quasimodo, because he was always the low guy walking around picking feed off the ground while everybody else was on top of him doing stuff. So we let him live up until processing time. So his weights are in here. So he definitely that last week he was not putting on weight like everybody else was. So his totals are in here. So when we look at these 11 Cornish Cross, totals we had were the following. And this is dressed weight. So again, this is skin off, no wings, eviscerated in the bag and put on the scale. So we had weights of 2.8, 4.1, 4.5, 4.5, 4.31, 4.6, 2.25, that was Quasimodo, 4.9, 4.6, 4.75, and 5.02. That was the big boy at the end. He was the biggest one, 5 pounds. And our Freedom Ranger was 3.1 pounds. So if we look at that and say, how did the Freedom Ranger compare? Well, if you take Quasimodo out of there, you take that 2.25 out of there and disqualify that, then we only had one other chicken that was under the weight of the Freedom Ranger. That was at 2.8. And what was interesting is that one Cornish Cross that was 2.8 was actually, he wasn't a solid white bird. He actually had some black streaks and some brown feathers on him. So he's one that may have had some interesting breeding there, not come from the pure line of the Cornish Cross. So he wasn't necessarily 100% Cornish Cross, so that's why he didn't have as much weight. So you could say that take Quasimodo out because of his leg issues, to 2.25, disqualify him, and then look at this one, this speckled one, 2.8, take him out. Hey, cull it. Rough talk my chickens there. So you take out the speckled one, that 2.8, then everybody else that was true Cornish Cross that didn't have leg issues came in much higher. In fact, if you look at the numbers there, 3.1 for the Freedom Ranger, the next lowest number I had was 4.1. So the Cornish Cross was at least 1 pound heavier than the Freedom Ranger at 10 weeks. So that's big, obviously, when you look at feed conversion, and that's what we'll get into next. We'll look at the cost of feed. When you look at feed conversion, that's going to be a big issue because that really is going to eat into your profit margin, literally, pardon the pun, that if they're eating more feed to get bigger, then that's going to be a concern. So again, as you see behind me, that's the reason why we have the rest of these Freedom Rangers here. I'm going to let them go several more weeks and then process them, and then we'll be able to compare these weights to see if just how long do you have to get to these weights, or will you ever get to these weights that you see with the Cornish Cross. Okay, so what I did is I came up with an average weight, and I left Quasimodo and I left speckled chicken in there to give me the true average of what I've raised, because there's not going to be any there's no guarantees you're not going to have the exact same thing when you order your chickens. You could have some lesser genetics there that you're not going to put on weight, and you're going to have leg issues, and you think, well, I'm not going to just throw that chicken away, I'm still going to process it. So to me, that's real world. I left it in here for my average to do my calculations. So the average weight of these 11 birds was 4 pounds and 4.21 pounds. So 4.21 pounds is the average I'm using for the Cornish cross. So let's look at food consumption. So what do we have? Well, through the course of 10 weeks, I bought 9 bags, 9 50-pound bags of feed. The first bag was a chick starter. And again, different people say different things about what you start an actual a broiler on. Do you start it on a broiler mash directly, or do you put it on a chick starter or something like that? I went ahead and put it on a chick starter. So out of those 9 bags, one of those 50-pound bags was a chick starter, and all of my birds got that. I didn't keep feed separate for the Red Rangers or the Cornish cross, but just anecdotally watching them, the Cornish cross ate, even though it was 50-50 starting out as far as the total number of birds of Cornish cross to Red Rangers. At that point, the Cornish cross were probably eating about 70% of the feed, because they were just vacuum cleaners, man. They were sucking it down. And then even as we had loss, as we were down to 11 to 14 as far as our score goes, 11 Cornish cross to 14 Freedom Rangers, it was still probably 50-50 with the feed. They were still eating that much feed more than the Red Rangers. So that's one of those things that in the way I set this up, it really didn't allow me to see how feed was consumed. And ideally, I should have had 2 tractors and had a Cornish cross in one and the Freedom Ranger in another, and dosed the same amount of feed. But I didn't do it that way. So that that was one element of experiment there that we didn't get to do. But that would have given me a better idea of feed consumption. So 9 bags of feed, and so the first bag, like I said, was a chick starter. Then the following 8 bags were a meat bird variety. So that's a 20 to 21% protein in this feed mix. And first of all, I had a little trouble finding that. We have very limited resources when it comes to feed stores around here. So I ended up getting those at Rural King. They had the best price, and they were closer than the big feed store that I go to for all my hog feed. That's an hour drive for me, whereas Rural King is on my way home from the office. So I went with that. So my average price for both the chick starter and the meat bird, the 21%, was $13.50 per 50. So that is $121.50 total I spent in feed for the course of 10 weeks. Well, if you do the math there, $121.50 divided by 24 birds is $5.06. So that's how much feed cost I had in each chicken. Well, if you look at that, so $5.06. What are my other input costs that I had? Well, obviously I had to buy the chicken. So the chicken coming from the hatchery was $2.35, and then I also had the expense of shipping. My shipping was $26. To bag and label and zip tie the chicken in its bag, I had right at 50 cents in cost of that. So you add all those things together and you get our total here per bird. So when you look at that total and say, okay, well, that's what I had in it. That was my cost. If I was going to go buy a pasture-raised chicken that was, good quality chicken that had a good life, didn't get hormones, antibiotics, whatever everybody's worried about, then you'd say, okay, what's the cost of that? Well, everybody wants to break that down per pound. So you say, okay, what was my cost per pound? Well, if my average weight was 4 pounds, 4.21 pounds, then obviously you can do the math there. Total cost divided by that average weight, gives you the total of what your cost is per pound of chicken. Well, you compare that, and you can compare that to your store. Obviously, everybody in different places are going to have different prices there. Do your comparison and say, okay, well, to buy a whole chicken at the store that's organic or pasture raised or whatever you're looking for, you're going to pay X. So obviously this is going to be cheaper to raise it. Now again, I'm not factoring in the cost of the chicken tractor, because the chicken tractor it's not something I'm going to throw away after the end of this batch of chickens. It's something that's going to be used over and over again. It's infrastructure. So I can't just take the cost of that and divide it up by each of my chickens and say, well, that's part of it. But it is an expense. So if I was only going to do this one time and never do it again, then okay, yeah, you're going to have to factor that in. But hopefully I can get a lot of life out of this chicken tractor. I can use it for years to come. So that's something that obviously would be amortized over the course of several years. So that's factored in as well. So the big question we run into when we look at this is, okay, how many chickens does my family need per year to justify doing all this, and of course having clean eating and clean food, which is what we want. That's the end game we want, is clean food. Well, I think, if you ate a whole chicken every week, that would be 52 chickens for the year. We're not going to eat a whole chicken every week. We're probably going to eat, not one every other week, but somewhere in between there. Now, obviously, there's times that we'd like to have chicken breasts to do whatever. Well, a chicken only has 2 breasts. So, are you going to thaw out three or four whole chickens so you can get 6 to 8 breasts for your meal, and then you got to do something else with the rest of the chicken? So that's an issue too, as far as processing. You process it as a whole chicken, or do you go ahead and butcher it down to its individual cuts? And we'll save that for another discussion. We're going to get into some of that here in the next couple weeks. So that's a concern as well. So obviously when we look at this type of stuff, when you put this infrastructure in, you want to look and say, is this scalable? We as homesteaders, we always want to look at profitability opportunities. Say, if we're going to stop doing a day job, or we're going to be able to work on farm exclusively, then what are we going to do to pay the bills, to pay the taxes, do all that stuff to allow us to live vicariously on our homestead? So looking at pastured poultry, we've talked about pork being profitable. We've talked about other aspects of how to make money on our homestead. Can you make money with pastured poultry? And the answer is yes, you can, but it's all about scalability. So if you did this math and say, what's the average price? What could I sell? I know what an average cost per pound is for chicken. What is the potential for selling chicken per pound? And again, you got to look at a whole chicken if that's how you're going to process. If you're going to cut them down into smaller cuts, then there's another set of issues that come into that. But look around and say, what's the market going to bear for the cost of chicken, a whole chicken per pound? And we've seen around here that the price is right around $4.75 to $5 a pound, possibly. And again, there's a lot of variation in that. So for safety, I would say $4.75. So if you look at that, the cost of your chicken per pound, what it costs to raise it compared to what you're going to be able to sell it per pound, then you can kind of do the math and say, well, if I'm making $5 to $7 to $8 per chicken, that's not a whole lot of money. That's not something that's going to allow you to stay home forever unless you do a whole bunch of them. 1,000 birds at $8 profit per bird. That's $8,000. That's a nice chunk of change. But you got to process 8,000 birds, or you got to process 1,000 birds. So that's a lot of work. So would I say? So would I plan to move forward and make this a profit center, a potential profit center for Red Tool House? Yeah, we're going to try it. We're going to stick our toe in the water and see. We've got a lot of customers that really want to try our pastured poultry. I like just having all these different aspects of revenue potential. A, we like to do it, we enjoy it. But B, it allows me to have an opportunity to introduce people to other things. Hey, you like our eggs? Try our meat, our pastured poultry. Hey, you like our pastured poultry? Well, we've got pork. And to me, pork is my biggest profit center, so I always want to keep pushing people toward my pork sales. But if I have the opportunity to give them other things that I can still make a profit on and introduce them to all the things we have available on our farm, then I think that variety is just going to help the farm, help the opportunity for us to generate revenue to reinvest in the infrastructure of this place. So I would definitely go that route. Well, you may be saying right now, wait a minute, Troy, you're missing the one key piece. And I realize that, and we're going to talk about that right now. What's the rest of the infrastructure? I've just talked about the chicken tractor. And obviously, if you've got all these chickens, if you do 1,000 birds, what are you going to do with 1,000 chickens after you've processed them? Well, obviously we have a walk-in freezer, so I don't know that I could get 1,000 chickens in my walk-in freezer, but I probably wouldn't process 1,000 chickens all at once. I'd probably do them in cycles there. So, of course, the chicken tractors, the freezer for storage, but on processing day is probably the biggest thing you're going to look at as far as cost goes. If I'm processing 11 birds like I did, or 12 birds like I did, then the process we did, no big deal. We're skinning them out, eviscerating, and we're doing it all by hand there, no big deal, nothing crazy. Single kill cone, that type of stuff. So really no big deal. But you take that and you multiply that by 10, then that turns an already long day into just an excruciating long day. So you're going to have to, if you scale this up, you're going to have this equipment. You're going to have these things. Now, we won't get into talking about all the different pluckers and all the different scalders and all the different equipment, because there's just so many options out there. And I'm sure a lot of people have their own opinions on it, but we'll probably break down and discuss those later as we get to show some examples. But I think regardless of what you do, you're going to have a scalder and a plucker. And your stainless steel tables, all those type of things, those things are nice to have. They're not extremely necessary, but they are very handy to have. So you just keep that in mind. But the scalder and the plucker you're definitely going to have. So if you look at, okay, we're going to do our homemade job. I've seen guys take hot water tanks, cut them in half, and use the thermostat setting on that to keep them at the temperature. All that's great. You can get a used hot water tank for maybe 20 or 30 bucks, and the time you spend in it trying to get it set up, it is what it is. But if you're going to go out and you're going to buy equipment, you can see that entry-level scalders and pluckers are 400 bucks each. But even when you get into the nice Feathermans and things, you're looking at almost $1,000 per piece of equipment. So that's something that's really going to eat directly into your profit, and you're going to say, well, man, I'm going to have to do a whole bunch of birds to get this to even be profitable. And then I'm going to have all this equipment. If I ever get out of the poultry processing business, then I've got all this equipment I got to move. So we're looking at all that, and there are other options. So what are the other options when it comes to processing instead of going out and buying all this expensive processing equipment? Well, obviously you can send it somewhere to be processed. If you're lucky enough to be in a state where you have a USDA inspected processing facility, then of course all you do is you cage up your chickens and you take them to the processor and do that. Now obviously there's a lot of expense involved in that. John Siskovich, who actually again modeled this tractor after his design, he actually has on his website, Farm Marketing Solutions, he has on his website the opportunity for you can download his spreadsheet from, I think it's 2015. It's a full detail of his profit margin, all costs, all expenses, all details of his poultry operation for the year. And he sends his chickens out to be processed by a USDA facility. He used to do it on farm, and then he decided to outsource it. Well, I believe he has a little over $5 invested in each bird in processing. Now he gets, I think, $6 per pound on his chicken, so that's how he's able to justify that expense. But that definitely eats into your profit margin. But again, it seems to be a good model for him. It's something he's not taking the time to process all those birds. He's sending it out to be processed, and allows him to focus on other revenue streams on the farm. So it's a good model that works for him. So check that out and see what you have. Now for us, I'd have to transport my birds over 2 hours to get them somewhere. So I don't think that's something I would consider. That's a lot of stress on the animals. So not only would I have the processing fees, but then of course the fuel and transport costs of taking them that far. Well, another option, and I've seen it starting to pop up, so depending on what state you're in, and this is really going to be state specific, I believe, is your extension service, your Department of Ag, or even if you've got an ag-based university in your state, there's more popularity in these mobile processing units, because these departments of agriculture for states are seeing, hey, we need to support small farms, which is great. That's the attitude we want to have. So they're putting together these mobile processing units. So they're just these big enclosed trailers that get towed to different farms and processed. Now obviously there's costs associated with that. There are stipulations of a minimum number of birds, all that type of stuff. But from what I've researched, our state has one, and it's actually just now getting started. So when I was actually on the phone today with the Department of Ag, and they were still kind of working out the details, so he really couldn't give me details on it. But he said, well, our state university actually has 2 of those units, so I can send you the information about that, and maybe you can talk to them and see what costs are associated with that. So that's an option. You think about it, it'd be kind of cool if if I've got all my chickens here on the pasture, and I know that, okay, tomorrow when I want to process, I've pre-scheduled this trailer to roll in, and this thing's got everything. It's got the scalder, the plucker, the bagger, all that type of stuff. It's gonna be like a full-blown professional operation. But again, there's expense in that. You're just going to have to figure out, is that expense going to make sense when it comes time to look at all this as a profit center. So that's some options with processing. Again, as we mentioned in our last video, we were on Polyface Farms looking at their chicken operation, how they process. Really like his setup, outdoor setup. It's kind of like just imagine a back porch on your house. It's actually on the back of his store. But it's nice roof line, but just open walls. So you got a lot of air, got a natural light coming through, concrete floor, and they have all their processing equipment there. So we were there when they were not processing, and it's all there. It's just stuff's kind of turned over, so it's not collecting dust and all that type of stuff. But I know they have a very strict cleaning regimen. They come in and clean everything before they process. But then their assembly line starts right there in that open shelter, which I love the idea of that. And if you watch any videos about Joel talking about that, he's talking about how his bacterial count is way lower than these big enclosed processing systems that sterilize everything, radiate, bleach, or whatever. He's getting better, healthier outcomes from the testing and inspection that sometimes happens at his place. Well, of course, the last big thing I just mentioned there is inspections. If you're going to try to do this for any type of profit, you really need to check with your Division of Agriculture for your state, because there's federal regulations, and then some states have state regulations. And the state regulations are usually based off the federal regulations, but you got to play ball nicely with both of them. So you really need to check that out and see what's it going to require, because there's packaging restrictions, there's the total number of birds you can produce before you have to be inspected. All of those elements come into play. So before you ramp up and start buying equipment and order thousands of birds, chicks to come to your farm, you really want to do your homework there, because man, you don't want to get shut down after that big investment and realize, oh wow, I'm supposed to be in some big crazy facility because of the number of birds I'm trying to do. But yeah, I would think most people are smart enough to know to do your homework before you hit the ground running there. But that's definitely something to look at, and your Department of Agriculture will usually have that information. But bigger states, have bigger ag universities that can really have that good information available for you. Well, so what's next? Well, next is, again, in several weeks we're going to process the rest of our Red Rangers and just get an idea of, I'm still keeping track of how much feed I'm using for these guys now. So we'll get an idea of how much feed they're consuming when we're ready to process. Like I said, we're at the 10-week mark, just a couple days past 10 weeks. So I may go as far as 14 weeks. So I may go another month and then just see how big these guys are. But I would really be concerned if 14 weeks and they are hanging just below the Cornish cross weights we got at 10 weeks. Then to me that's going to be a real question of, wow, I just don't know that the feed conversion is going to work there. Now again, we haven't done the taste test. Maybe that's a game changer. I have noticed that Siskovich and some of these other guys that do multiple breeds, they do charge more for the Red Rangers. So I think he charges 50 cents more a pound for his Red Rangers. So it could be one of those deals where people say, well, I want a heritage breed, or it could be a flavor thing. I'm not sure what the what the catalyst is to be able to drive that price up. But it is interesting. We'll definitely look at that. So keep an eye out. We'll get into videos when we're talking about that, and we'll detail the processing of these Red Rangers a little bit more. Again, we'll probably still skin, because I don't see myself buying a plucker here in the next 4 weeks. So we'll probably still go that route. But keep an eye out for that. Well, if you have any questions about all the numbers we went over and any of the details you want, just leave a comment below and I can respond to that. Feel free to ask any questions. If you feel maybe I didn't explain something in detail, just let me know and we can go back and visit that. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up if you would please, and if you haven't subscribed, we've got videos that come out every Friday. Be sure to check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Red Toolhouse Farm, and be sure to visit our website, redtoolhouse.com, and sign up for our e-newsletter, the button at the bottom there, and that way it keeps you informed of what's going on. All right, take care.